She was just 5 years old, wearing a sweater too big and hope far bigger, walking into a towering glass building with her mother's resume clutched in her tiny hands. She wasn't invited. She wasn't expected. But what she did next stopped. A CEO silenced the lobby and rewrote the rules of what bravery looks like. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video and tell us where are you watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The sun had barely risen when Nora Green pressed her phone to her ear with trembling fingers. Her voice cracked as she tried to sound steady, but each word came out softer than the last. Her head was heavy with fever. Her back pressed into the cold sheets of the clinic bed. "I understand," she whispered, "but I'm really not well. I've been preparing for this interview all week. I just need to reschedule, please." On the other end, the voice was clipped and sharp. "I'm sorry, Miss Green, but Westmark Industries does not reschedule interviews. If you are not here at 9 sharp, your application will be removed from consideration. Thank you for your time." The call ended with a cold click. No goodbye, no kindness, just silence. Nora lowered her phone slowly, her arm dropping to the side of the bed like it had lost all strength. The hospital room was pale and quiet only. The soft beep of machines and the sound of passing nurses outside her door filled the space. She looked over at the folder resting on the chair beside her, the folder she had packed with care the night before. Inside was her resume, neatly printed and protected in a clear sleeve. There was also a small handwritten note she had added that read, "This is where things begin again." Her eyes filled with tears as she turned away from the light coming through the blinds, her body aching from fever, her heart aching from disappointment. "I just wanted one chance," she whispered, barely audible. "For my daughter, she deserves more than this." In the corner of the room, curled in a stiff hospital chair, a small girl with dark curly hair and wide brown eyes sat watching. Her name was Myra, and she was 5 years old. Myra didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just sat quietly, legs too short to touch the floor, swinging gently beneath her. Her hands were folded neatly on her lap, her eyes fixed on her mother. She had watched Nora come home late night after night, still smiling, even when her shoes had holes, still singing lullabies, even when she had skipped dinner. She had seen her mother try again and again, always with hope, even when life made hope feel foolish. When Nora finally fell asleep, worn down by fever and exhaustion, Myra slid off the chair, her small feet making no sound on the cold floor. She walked over to her mother and gently tucked the blanket around her shoulders, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. Then she turned and looked at the chair, at the folder. She stood still for a long time, just staring, her tiny brows furrowed in thought. Finally, she reached out with both hands and picked up the folder. It was large and awkward in her arms, but she held it close like it was something precious. She turned and padded over to her small backpack sitting by the window. It was pink with sparkles and a tiny yellow duck keychain hanging from the zipper. She opened it slowly, placed the folder carefully inside, and zipped it back up. Then she reached into her mother's bag and pulled out a single bus pass. She stared at it like it was a key to something important. Next, she walked to the coat rack and found her favorite purple sweater, the one with stars on the sleeves. She put it on, slipped into her sneakers, and slung the backpack over her shoulders. The nurses were busy. No one noticed her walk through the hallway. Past the vending machine and the nurse's station, she walked straight and sure, like she knew exactly where she was going. Outside, the city was noisy and alive, the cold morning air pressed against her cheeks, but she didn't stop. She had seen the building before in a picture on the fridge. She remembered the name and the shape of the letters. Myra walked 3 blocks, counting the street signs just like her mom had taught her. She waited at a crosswalk and followed others across. She didn't talk to anyone. She didn't need help. She was on a mission. At the bus stop, She climbed onto the number 17, the one her mother had circled on a map days ago. She found a seat by the window, hugged her backpack, and waited. 40 minutes later, she stood in front of Westmark Industries, a tall glass building that sparkled under the morning sun. It looked like something from a fairy tale. She took a deep breath and walked in. Her tiny sneakers squeaked slightly against the polished floor. The lobby was grand and full of people in suits, voices low, movements fast. Myra walked straight to the front desk, where a woman in glasses looked up and blinked in surprise. "Hello," the woman said slowly, leaning forward. "Are you here with someone, sweetie?" Myra shook her head, pulled her backpack around, and carefully opened it. She held up the folder like it was a ticket to somewhere important. "I'm here for the interview," she said simply, her voice calm and clear. The woman behind the desk froze, her pen still in mid-air. She looked at the folder, then at the child, and something in her expression began to change. This was no ordinary morning, she realized, and this was no ordinary little girl. The lobby of Westmark Industries was buzzing with the usual morning rush. People in suits walked briskly across the marble floor. Voices murmured into phones. Coffee cups steamed in hand. Elevators opened and closed with soft chimes. But none of that mattered to the little girl, now standing quietly in front of the reception desk. Her pink backpack snug on her back, her purple sweater slightly too big at the sleeves, and her face serious in a way that didn't quite belong to someone her age. Cynthia Hall, the receptionist, was a woman who had worked at Westmark for over a decade. Nothing surprised her anymore, or so she thought, until she looked up and found herself eye to eye with a child barely tall enough to reach the counter. "Hello there," Cynthia said gently, leaning forward with curiosity. "Are you lost? Sweetheart, are you waiting for someone?" Myra shook her head slowly, her small hands gripping the oversized folder, now resting on the edge of the counter. "I'm here for the interview," she said, the words simple, clear, and delivered with perfect confidence. Cynthia blinked, her mouth slightly open. For a second she thought maybe she misheard. "You're here for the what?" "The job interview," Myra repeated, lifting the folder higher. "It's my mom's. She's sick today, so I came instead." People nearby began to slow down. One man paused mid-step. Another stopped talking on his phone. Even the elevator ding went unnoticed as all eyes turned toward the tiny girl with the golden folder. Cynthia glanced at the schedule on her screen. Her finger traced down until she found the name Nora Green. 9 a.m. interview, marked with a yellow tag. "And your name?" Cynthia asked softly, not wanting to scare the child. "Mira," the girl replied, her eyes wide but steady. Cynthia didn't know what to say next. She looked at the folder, looked back at the girl, then tapped her headset. "Lena," she said into the mic, "can you please tell Mr. Breyer to come down to the lobby? Just say it's about the last interview on the schedule, and that it's something he really needs to see upstairs." In an office surrounded by glass walls and high ceilings, Jonas Breyer stood staring at a financial report, his face unreadable. Jonas was the kind of man who people rarely approached without reason, smart, successful, and known for being impossible to impress. He had built Westmark from the ground up, turning it into a major name in just 7 years. But he wasn't known for warmth. His assistant, Lena, stepped into the office with a strange expression, half smile, half disbelief. "Jonas," she said, "I know this will sound odd, but you might want to come downstairs for the final interview slot." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "The one who emailed in from the employment center, marketing degree incomplete, gap in work history, that one?" "Not quite," Lena said. "It's someone else, someone representing her. Just trust me, it's worth a look." Jonas didn't like surprises, but he hated curiosity even more, so he closed his file, adjusted his watch, and headed for the elevator. When the doors opened to the lobby, his eyes scanned the room. then landed on the small figure standing calmly beside the reception desk. She turned to face him as soon as he stepped out. Her eyes lit up slightly, her smile small but full of purpose. "Are you the boss?" she asked, her voice light. Jonas stopped mid-step, unsure if this was real. "Yes," he said slowly. "I suppose I am." Myra walked right up to him and held out the folder with both hands. "This is my mom's resume," she said. "She really wanted this job, but she's very sick today. She said it's the most important chance we've had, and I think she deserves it." Jonas stared at the folder, then at her. Something inside him paused, something old, maybe forgotten, something that didn't fit into spreadsheets or charts. He took the folder without saying a word, the room around them completely quiet now. Even Cynthia had stood up from her chair. Jonas turned to her, his voice quiet but firm. "Clear my morning, 15 minutes. No calls." "Yes, sir," Cynthia replied quickly, still staring at the girl like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "Shall we?" Jonas said, holding out a hand toward the hallway. Mira nodded and followed him, her steps small but sure, her backpack bouncing slightly with each stride inside a small conference room. Jonas pulled out a chair twice her size, and she climbed up without help, placing the folder carefully on the table. He sat across from her and opened the folder, his eyes scanning the resume, though his focus kept returning to the little girl watching him closely. "So Myra," he said, keeping his voice low, "tell me, why does your mother want to work here?" Myra thought for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. Jonas never hovered, but he noticed everything. How she spoke with kindness, how she helped new interns, how she stayed behind to finish a slide deck without being asked. And then there was Mira. Every Friday after school, she'd arrive with a small drawing tucked into her backpack. She would sit on the office couch with her crayons, waiting for Uncle Jay, as she now called Jonas. He once canceled an entire meeting just to take her for strawberry ice cream down the block. A routine that soon became their weekly tradition. The office whispered, of course, but not with judgment, with quiet smiles, with respect. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall buildings, Myra sat coloring on the couch, and Nora was packing up her things. Myra looked up and asked with wide, innocent eyes, "Mommy, can I call Uncle Jay?" "Daddy?" Nora froze, her hand pausing mid-motion, her heart leaping into her throat. She turned slowly toward Jonas, unsure what she'd find in his face, but he was already walking over, his eyes soft, his smile gentle. He crouched beside Myra and placed a hand over hers. "If it's okay with your mom," he said quietly, "I'd be honored." Nora couldn't hold back the tears anymore, not from fear or sorrow, but from the kind of joy she never believed she'd be allowed to feel again. A year later, Nora's name was printed at the top of a new office door. Project team lead. Her team respected her, trusted her, leaned on her for guidance. Jonas stood beside her in meetings, but he also stood beside her in life, sharing late dinners, helping with homework, cheering at school plays. Mira had a drawer full of crayons in the company supply closet, a reserved seat in the break room, and her own badge that read, "Future CEO." And every Saturday, without fail, the three of them walked to the same small ice cream shop and shared a bowl of strawberry ice cream. Not because it was fancy, not because it was tradition, but because it was the taste of everything they had built from love, courage, and one unforgettable golden folder. Jonas never hovered, but he noticed everything. How she spoke with kindness, how she helped new interns, how she stayed behind to finish a slide deck without being asked. And then there was Mira. Every Friday after school, she'd arrive with a small drawing tucked into her backpack. She would sit on the office couch with her crayons, waiting for Uncle Jay, as she now called Jonas. He once canceled an entire meeting just to take her for strawberry ice cream down the block. A routine that soon became their weekly tradition. The office whispered, of course, but not with judgment, with quiet smiles, with respect. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall buildings, Myra sat coloring on the couch, and Nora was packing up her things. Myra looked up and asked with wide, innocent eyes, "Mommy, can I call Uncle Jay?" "Daddy?" Nora froze, her hand pausing mid-motion, her heart leaping into her throat. She turned slowly toward Jonas, unsure what she'd find in his face. But he was already walking over, his eyes soft, his smile gentle. He crouched beside Myra and placed a hand over hers. "If it's okay with your mom," he said quietly, "I'd be honored." Nora couldn't hold back the tears anymore, not from fear or sorrow, but from the kind of joy she never believed she'd be allowed to feel again. A year later, Nora's name was printed at the top of a new office door. Project team lead. Her team respected her, trusted her, leaned on her for guidance. Jonas stood beside her in meetings, but he also stood beside her in life, sharing late dinners, helping with homework, cheering at school plays. Myra had a drawer full of crayons in the company supply closet, a reserved seat in the break room, and her own badge that read Future CEO. And every Saturday, without fail, the three of them walked to the same small ice cream shop and shared a bowl of strawberry ice cream, not because it was fancy, not because it was tradition, but because it was the taste of everything they had built from love, courage, and one unforgettable golden folder.